Hello, I'm Chip Pickering. I'm the CEO of Encompass. I want to welcome everyone to our webinar today. The objective is to talk and have a great conversation about how competitive network providers can win hyperscaler next generation network builds. And we have a great panel of people who are actually doing it, winning and building. This is a great moment for our industry as AI has brought about tremendous investment in hyperscale data centers and the fiber networks connecting them. And so it's a timely, it's a relevant. And today, moderating this panel is David Winch, the one and the only, the West Point grad, who's going to guide the conversation. And then I hope have everyone, Dave has on the panel, Kyle Hildenbrand from Vivacity, Bill Long, Zayo, Tom Spackman from Gigabit Fiber, talk about what they're doing to build the networks to match what the hyperscalers need. This is a great conversation at a good time. So David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chip. Thank you very much. Again, I'm David Winch, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Accent Networks. I also have the role as the chair of the Encompass Advisory Committee to the board. And before we get around to introducing the stars of this webinar and panel, along the way, I just want to take a moment to again reach out and say, for all of you, that anything you're looking to do to improve, or ideas you have to improve what we do at the show for Encompass, or anything from a Encompass point of view, our committee, Kyle is also on the committee with me, that's on this panel. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll David Winch at Accent Networks. It's dwinch at Accent Networks is my email address. But feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk with anybody about ideas to make things to improve. This topic we plan to do again at the show itself, and we're going to invite a hyperscaler to be on here with us when we do it then. So we're looking forward to the panel. So let me go ahead and one other note. If you have not yet registered for the show, it's not too late to get your early discount. So go ahead and take care of that. But let me let our panel members introduce themselves. We're going to start off with Bill Long. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Bill?
So yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Bill Long. I'm in charge of product and strategy here at Zayo. I think relative to this panel, I think most everybody probably knows about Zayo have fiber networks throughout the U.S. and Europe. Relative to the hyperscalers, we've been building an operating network for the hyperscalers for metro fiber connecting data centers for cloud, the long haul network connecting those same infrastructure, and then also critically providing connectivity from the enterprise locations connecting into that hyperscale infrastructure, as well as IP services to allow them to reach out to the internet. So we've been building and operating infrastructure for these guys for a really long time, and we've got the bruises to prove it.
All right, thanks, Bill. Tom.
Sure. Tom Spackman. I'm the principal owner and chief executive of Gigabit Fiber. We're a metro fiber provider headquartered in Dallas. And we've been placing fiber in the ground for about 20 years as a kind of carrier competitive access provider. 3 or 4 years ago, we pivoted a little bit. We won some hyperscale builds in the metro in Dallas, and it's really pivoted our business significantly. Although we're primarily in Dallas, we also have a network in El Paso, Austin, San Antonio, and South Texas. Thank you, Bill.
And Kyle.
You bet. Thanks, David. Kyle Hildebrand. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Vivacity Infrastructure Group. I represent our portfolio of companies, including EX Squared Technology. So some of you out there may have heard of that. We design, build, operate, maintain, and commercialize or monetize communications assets for a variety of clients, including hyperscalers. We typically represent the non-traditional asset owners, governments like states and counties or tollways, DOTs, but it also goes into the private owners as well. We first started working or building for hyperscalers in 2015, so we've been at this for a little bit, and much like the scars Bill mentioned, they're there, and some tuition has been paid, but we've learned a lot along the way. We've built a lot of relationships, and so looking forward to this conversation.
All right, thanks, Kyle. And just to share, as far as the company I represent, Accent Networks, Um, so for those of you that are out there that are involved in optimizing networks, or you've ended up maybe you've changed wholesale contracts, maybe you have just taken on new assets. Maybe you've merged with other companies and you've created a demand for additional circuit design and order management work. We have people to help with that. But also, we are more than telecom engineers. We've also become data integrity experts, and we're here to help you get your clean up your data to make it easier to operate. So that's what Accent Networks. We're happy to help you there. So let's dig into today's topic, as far as understanding what competitive network providers must do now to win hyperscaler next generation network builds. And Bill Long, will start off with you. From those what did you say, bruises you had, or what
Yeah.
the lessons
Scars, bruises, all of the above.
that you had?
Arms.
So through those bruises, I guess, what would you say? What are the top three things that hyperscalers value the most in infrastructure partners today?
Yeah, so I think at the top of that list is probably proven track record. You know, if you think about the investments that these folks are making, you know, the cost of building a new AI data center now is like the same cost as building an aircraft carrier. So these are just huge, you know, swaths of capital that they're putting to work. And if the choke point for being able to monetize and to make money on that huge capital commitment they're making is the fiber that's going into it, and they're relying on a partner who, you know, doesn't have a proven track record or might stub their toe on, you know, not getting the underlying rights correct, or choosing a subcontractor and negotiating too aggressively, and that subcontractor goes bankrupt, and you're left with a stranded route. Like they need to know that they're working with vendors who have a deep, proven track record at scale of building and operating the infrastructure that they need. And the reason being is because, you know, the fiber that if you look at the overall, you know, the campus that they're building, the connectivity is a lot of times, you know, 2 to 5% of the total cost of that. So, you know, having it is just not worth their while to choose a partner that might strand them. And so having that deep, you know, record of delivering is probably the most important. The other is speed, and these are directly sort of at odds with each other. Is, you know, being super careful and being super diligent on your ability to deliver. If you don't have speed, because there is you know, it is an all-out arms race now for a lot of the infrastructure they're deploying with AI. So if you don't have existing capacity to be able to enable their needs today, while you might be augmenting more capacity, that's a big one. So, you know, first is a proven track record. Second is speed. That speed, most of the time they care about having the existing capacity and the forethought to to know where network's going to need to be, and to have sort of the balance sheet to be able to invest for the future instead of just, you know, investing off the sort of, you know, the underwritten value of the contract that they might be providing. And then lastly, and these all kind of rhyme with each other, is the ongoing financial viability. So again, if they get, you know, halfway through a 2-year build, and the company goes bankrupt, or you don't have the underwriting to continue the build, they have a big stranded asset problem on their hands. So it's the proven track record, it's the speed, and it's that ongoing viability of the underlying provider. And there's a lot that's bundled all under those, but it's those are the three big ones, I think.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Kyle, I guess from your perspective, you've heard three that Bill has presented. What might you see differently than what Bill see as far as what might be in the top three things that hyperscalers value most in infrastructure partners today?
Sure, sure. Well, so that's gonna be tough to follow because Bill is pretty spot on. But I think my perspective is probably a little bit different because our business model is not at all like Zayo, and we're not in competition with Zayo. So I'm coming at it from an infrastructure design build perspective. I'd say probably the first one is really understanding the problem that those hyperscalers need to solve. So hyperscalers are similar only in the fact that, you know, they operate at, you know, a super scale, but I think that's kind of where it stops. So each one of them is different. Each one of their needs are going to be different. You know, having a partner that understands their playbook for each situation and not lumping your canned solution into the bucket to solve their problem. So really kind of a unique service delivery mechanism. I think it kind of bleeds into the next one, which is, when you're working with the hyperscalers, and they're all a little bit different, like I mentioned, but they want to be the customer when you're working with them. They don't just want to be another customer, and they want that unique solution, to be solving the problem that they have. And I think that's probably a recurring theme as I think about hyperscalers really solving their problem. They want partners with, that are going to work on long-term thinking aligned with their thoughts. They want you to help them minimize risk. They want you to take accountability. They want you to maintain confidentiality. And like Bill said, having extremely strong financials is really important to them. So I think a little bit different perspective, but I think they both at different places in the market are probably pretty good advice or pretty good experience
Yeah.
based on
So,
our
so
experience.
Kyle, that part, what I think I heard you say is they want to be the customer, and that's capital T, capital H, capital E, the customer.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that
And you know what? That's okay. Every customer of every market segment really deserves to be that customer when you're working with them. But
Right.
you need to understand what you're trying to solve for and what really their problem is. If you understand their problem, things are going to go a lot smoother, and the relationship will mature a lot faster.
Well, Tom, I think Bill and Kyle have covered it pretty much, but did you have anything you wanted to pile on with, or?
Just to, be able to get to a yes answer for these guys and not using perhaps an old telco centric mindset is kind of an overarching ad that I would share.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, Tom, let's go to you for the second question. And by the way, for the participant or the people online here, feel free. Down at the bottom of Zoom, there's a little white box with a question mark in it, and underneath it says Q&A. If you open that up, you can type in your questions, and we'll get to your questions as we get to the end, or once we have them, I'll seek answers from the panel members to follow up by email if we need to. But feel free to put your questions in the Q&A as we go. But all right, Tom, second question that I had is, how are network design requirements evolving, such as edge compute, data, gravity, latency? What in your world, how are the network design requirements evolving in this market?
Drastically evolving. I think, if you maybe step back and rewind to, let's say, 2005, and back then a typical data center might have a single fiber entrance or maybe coax or twisted pair that the ILEC or the local cable company provided. And fast forward a few years later, maybe a fiber guy like Zayo or Gigabit or AboveNet or UPN or one of the other local providers that's probably on this call might have built in. And that was kind of the network for those guys. Hyperscale data centers today now demand at least 3 fully diverse carriers into these facilities, each with diverse entrances. And I think that's going to grow. And I won't be surprised to see maybe 5 or 6 separate vendors pulling into each one of these sites. And I think that's a very bullish trend, for some of the people who are on this call today. There's still room to be able to scratch out a position in this market. So I think that's great. From a fiber capacity, years ago we saw 2 pair, 6 fibers, 12 fiber strands. It morphed to 48 fibers. It moved on to 864 count cable that wanted to be dedicated directly to that customer. And today, we're seeing requests for spare ducts so that the hyperscaler can pull through next generation fiber in the future and not have to redig. And we've even seen capacity requirements as much as 8 2-inch conduits. Of entire duct bank has been requested for us as well. So it's a moving target. It's crazy. And to be honest, I'm not sure really. I don't know exactly why these customers need this much capacity, but they're convinced that they do. And I suspect that this growth will continue to grow at an exponential rate. Kind of transitioning from dark fiber to lit services, I think the 400 gig service is the new T1 for those of us on the call who even know what a T1 is. My colleague on the panel here, Bill, just recently, Zayo just published, some great data on kind of wavelength capacity and demand. I'm sure he can share some of that, that data that they recently published, but it's real. Again, the capacity is real. I think what's really notable, and it's been surprising to me, is that we've been able to sell both lit and dark services to the same customer at the same location. So they will contract for high capacity dark fiber and then come back to us and ask for lit services at this location. And you're like, how can that be? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And the answer is, these guys have different verticals within this organization with different services that they need. Sometimes the left hand is not knowing what the right hand is doing. And so we see the capacity requirements going up, different flavors of ice cream. And I think you just got to be in a position to be able to meet all those requirements.
Well, thank you, Tom. Bill, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, I mean, a lot of the demand that we're seeing from, the hyperscalers now is, of course, to enable their AI infrastructure. The AI design patterns look a lot like cloud, but kind of on steroids. So when you look at it from what is the overall topology, one thing we're not seeing is we're not seeing huge demand for some new edge use case for, inference at the bottom of the cell tower or something like that. We're still looking at latency being solved in the 20 to 30 millisecond kind of range. I would love for there to be some use case of kind of, inference at the bottom of a cell tower or further in the edge. We're just not seeing it in the market. So from a, again, the cloud design on steroids, scale, agree with Tom, scale has gone through the roof. Security is more important. So you got to make sure that the solutions that are being provided, whether it's lit or dark, and I think that's why a lot of folks are, especially the hyperscalers, wanting dark solutions because they don't want any of this. They want the perimeter to be as little accessible for security risks. And then latency, again, solving for the 20 to 30 milliseconds. So a lot of it looks like cloud on steroids, with the exception of big connectivity needed in Timbuktu locations. So, because of the power constraints of training, we're seeing demand for connectivity in, West Texas and in the Dakotas and locations where there just happens to be power that's proximate to our long haul network. Now, the dynamic there that you have to be careful, though, is like the demand is big enough that if you happen to have a long haul network proximate to it, it's good business. But but it's not so much that it warrants actually an underwriting a new build to that location. Because you could, we've done the math on that. We've tried to, we've wanted to build some unique locations, and generally the demand for that one or two, multi-hundred megawatt data center cannot singly underwrite a full network build. So it's demand in Timbuktu locations, but they kind of need to be proximate to a long haul network for it to economically make sense. So it's cloud on steroids and then Timbuktu are the two big patterns.
Thanks, Bill. Kyle, can you think of anything to add to what your fellow panelists have already?
No, I don't think so. I think the 2 points I'd have made were brought up. So
very good. But I guess, Kyle, let's go to what infrastructure trends are shaping the next 3 to 5 years of build outs from what you're seeing.
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I'm seeing is that, it was particularly from the hyperscaler community that we have exposure with, there's going to be more data center clustering, I think, and there's going to be more requirements for ultra high capacity backbones to connect data center to data center. And part of that is now they're really planning for the future. And I think it was Tom that mentioned that, there's more conduit out there, but we have seen an accelerated demand for conduit. Like it just passed our wildest dreams that some of the hyperscalers who were looking differently last year are now really heavily looking at conduit or already starting to build conduit. And so, they're thinking about the future. They're planning on, whatever that, what does that next 3 to 5 years look like? And so that's encouraging. Another thing that we're seeing, and a little bit to my surprise, is there's been a much more of a resurgence in custom builds and long-term IRUs. And I think that's because some of the hyperscalers, not all of them for sure, are starting to look at, what does longer term control look like? How do we get those ownership like economics out of the money, the capital that we're investing in some of these networks? So conduit builds are a great example. They're looking at some of them, and not all of them for sure, but less reliance on managed bandwidth and more looking at how do we take our destiny into our own hands and look at conduit. So Well, it's not probably common. It's certainly happening, and I don't know whether it's going to continue to happen, at an accelerated pace or like it is now, but it's out there. And then finally, I think, concurrent planning for both power infrastructure, complemented by fiber. I think we're going to see that just about everywhere because, fiber won't be the primary driver defining where these data centers go. You can bring fiber to a lot of places. And so, as they plan on, where they're going to put facilities, fiber and power are going to be looked at simultaneously, and one will complement the other. So I think those are really, in my mind, maybe the top three things that we're going to see over the next 18 months to 60 months.
All right. Well, Tom, what's your crystal ball say?
I think demand will continue to exceed our expectations. Again, I'm somewhat skeptical because I don't really fully understand why these guys need the amount of capacity or amount of conduits that they are requesting, but I'd still see demand going way up. I too, I mean, I've seen kind of, I think Bill said in Timbuktu or the middle of nowhere, some of these data centers chasing the power. I didn't think that would happen. It has happened. I do think that there's a ratio between, that facility ending up in a cornfield in, in Indiana, that there's some multiplier of an equal number of facilities in the metro where there's connectivity and eyeballs. And so I don't know what that ratio is, but my guess is it's probably in the 5 to 7 ratio. So every one facility that's been built out in the middle of nowhere, there's 6 of them that are going to have to be built in a metro. And I would just add that I think latency always matters. Bill again mentioned it, in the 20 to 30 second range or millisecond range, we've seen requirements as low as 1 millisecond, which speed of light dictates is about 100-kilometer segment. So, that's really kind of, I think someone mentioned kind of a metro cross connect or, dedicated cable between one data center on one side of the community with another data center on the other side. We see these guys asking that link be under 100-kilometer and below 1 millisecond. So
it's interesting. I've poked on those same. The best answer I've gotten to the question of why they need so much capacity, especially for AI, is something they call synchronous gradient descent. So as they take like a set of data and they distribute the data that needs to be trained on across the compute cluster, it updates about every 15 seconds to exchange the weights, and that's hugely bandwidth intensive. If they figure out how to do asynchronous gradient descent, I don't know what's going to happen to all those empty conduits. Because you're gonna you'll be able to put data centers in a lot of different places. So I do think there's, I agree that like we're in a huge macro tailwind, which is great. We've been in big macro tailwinds in the past where not all the players survive. There's a lot of people who are crypto miners who have data centers in the middle of nowhere. I would not be wanting to underwrite building fiber to those locations. So I think if my take on some of the infrastructure trends is, I think demand will increase, but demand's going to change. And it's going to be these small technology shifts where, oh, look, they can now, you don't need to be 1 millisecond away to do gradient descent. You can now be, 30 milliseconds and you can do asynchronous. And or there's a hiccup in the some DeepSeek thing pops up and these, data centers that people have big conviction in are no longer as valuable. So I think it's going to be, overall, the demand curve is going to go up, but there are going to be ebbs and flows in it. So I think like some of the lessons learned from previous bubbles, I think we should all be wise on making sure that we're putting our capital to work in really thoughtful ways. But I think the hyperscalers and others will move to put the risk onto us. And I think we as an industry need to be really thoughtful about not making mistakes of the past and buying in too much to the hype. But anyway, my 2 cents.
Panel members, why don't we take a look at the question that just popped into Q&A? The attendee has said, appreciate Kyle's comments on power driving fiber hand in hand. And the question here is, how tied in are companies to state and local government affairs? States like Colorado are preparing for a major power debate in 2026. Are companies participating and having a seat at the table? Anybody want to share their thoughts there?
Well, I would just say, I mean, I think on power, we don't think about power too much, but there's no doubt that, if there's not a path for 100, 200, or 400 megawatts, or even a gigawatt, the hyperscalers probably aren't going to come to that location. And if the hyperscalers don't come to that location, then this conversation that we're having is a little bit moot because they're not going to need the fiber. So there is no doubt that the fiber, that the power is a key driver, but to some extent, the fiber guys, at least I believe, we're kind of following the power as kind of secondary. Now, if these guys need specialized infrastructure built, maybe they're going to have to start thinking about the fiber guys a little bit more seriously in the design process. I think the hyperscale and the data center operators have generally taken the position that if they build one of these facilities, that one of us is going to beat a path and build to their facilities.
Well, since the person is brought up Colorado specifically, Bill, you're sitting in Denver. You want to share any perspective?
No, I think Tom hit
on
it.
this
I
question?
think Tom's exactly right. The dynamic I talked about earlier about the relative spend on what they're spending on the data center, both the data center itself and the compute that sits in it relative to the fiber. There are much bigger gorillas that are fighting this battle than us. And so we just ride on the back of those gorillas as the data center providers, and even the chip providers and others are fighting that battle. So we certainly stay very close to them. Like, I probably get 1 to 2 opportunities a week that come across my desk on, hey, I've got, a gigawatt of capacity in some middle of nowhere place. Can you connect to it? So there's certainly lots of activity, and we're part of the conversation, but we're more of a passenger than a driver at this point.
Great.
All right. Anything you want to add, Kyle?
The only thing I'd say is that, Bill's right. I think most of us who aren't the hyperscaler or aren't the data center developer are kind of a little bit in the wait and see mode. But the hyperscalers, certainly different groups within those companies are absolutely very engaged on, within the power planning cycle. So as they build those data centers or look for new facilities, I mean, they're well involved.
Okay. While we're here, Kyle, what are the specific expectations around route diversity and fiber density?
Well, I'm not a lit service provider, so I don't have the same perspective as some of these other guys. But I would say, physical path diversity, it's going to be just as important now as it ever has been. Lowering risk and increasing resiliency, and that's not specific to a hyperscaler, but that's going to stay really important. The proximity of some of these routes to data centers, I think, is going to get more important. Just as kind of in the past conversation, how does fiber complement that power and where those data centers are located? Specifically to density, I think the ultra high capacity, it's an expectation in some areas, but not everywhere and in all circumstances. I can tell you, in the last 90, 100 days, conversations I've had with different hyperscalers have been about everything from 48 dark fibers up to, multiple 864s. So I think every situation is different, and depending what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish is probably the thing that's going to drive, the fiber density. So understanding their needs, versus, or looking at what they want maybe versus what you want is probably the big deal there. At least from the builder perspective.
Bill, what would you like to add there?
Yeah, no, I think we hit on it, and a lot of the fiber density stuff that Tom hit on earlier was spot on. I do think that they care much more about route diversity than vendor diversity. So if you have a fly-by-night vendor and a trusted long-term vendor doing the diverse routes, they'd rather choose to geographically diverse routes, physically diverse routes than have a vendor who's not as reputable. So I think that's the big one from the design diversity.
Tom, anything you want to add to that one?
I'm good.
All right. Kyle, back at you here. How do smaller providers compete effectively with limited resources?
Oh, well, I guess it probably goes back to my comment about solving their problem. So giving that hyperscaler a value by delivering what they want, versus what you want to give them is probably really important. So, as that smaller provider looks for its space in the market, they need to develop relationships, and it's going to be different by customer and by location. But, I think more important than the size of the company is probably the operational maturity and the experience that they give that hyperscaler. So I think from some segments of our market, it'd be very tough for a very small provider to compete. But I think maybe on the dark fiber side, if someone has a route available that's unique, it's diverse, it's in the ground, there's speed to market using it, has the capacity, I think smaller providers can compete, certainly in some of these local markets. um, it's not impossible for them to, bring that speed to market. And, that's what's really needed at some point in time. So, I think working together with that hyperscaler, being their partner, looking at them, trying to find a win-win-win, so everybody has one and solving that problem. There's certainly opportunities for smaller providers. You can get more done working together.
Now, Tom, earlier you mentioned there was room for more people to get involved and things of that sort. I mean, what would you like to share as far as how smaller providers compete effectively with limited resources?
Yep. Well, we're definitely a small provider and we're competing. So I think, a couple things that come to mind on this, for my colleagues on the call. The first, obviously, the hardest thing to do as a small provider is to raise capital and have capital. And so that's a differentiator. So how do you solve that? Well, we've been fortunate enough to get the hyperscales to fund most of our CapEx. And so I think, being able to get the customer to, provide capital for you to be able to go build this infrastructure, that's one way that you can compete with the big guys. I think being the local expert is absolutely critical. Knowing your geography, rights of way, the local permitting process. Hyperscalers want to know that you can deliver. And I think your local expert, can add some credibility for a smaller provider to be win. I think the other thing is that, the local guy, the smaller guy has to have some infrastructure in the ground and has proven that they can build network. And so if you have some existing network that allows you to get a competitive advantage to win some of this business, then I think, that's critical. I think, having stuff underground, we haven't really mentioned aerial versus underground. These guys pretty much require underground unless there's, some extraordinary circumstances. So you got to have underground infrastructure. And then what we've been able to do, once you prove yourself in one market, then we have been dragged to another market where we didn't have existing infrastructure. But the only reason that customer allowed me to do that is because I proved to them that I was able to deliver network in one market. So I think trying to stay local and, in your backyard is critical for you trying to win. And, I think in a lot of these cases, when these guys come to the facility, and I've talked about kind of vendor diversity, so some guy builds a new facility, they're looking for service, they're going to go buy a circuit from Bill at Zayo. I mean, they are. And if it's not him, they're going to buy it from Lumen, or they're going to buy it from Verizon, or they're going to buy from 2 or 3 of those guys. But I do believe that they leave one of those slots open for a local subject matter expert because, they can call my cell phone and I answer it and we'll dispatch someone to fix their network. And I think they value that. So, I think, there's the big guys are going to get their piece, but there is a spot for the local small provider.
So, Tom, one of the things I heard there with the idea is sometimes being local helps, but it goes back to the very first comment Bill brought up in the very beginning: proven track records, right? So, when given the opportunity, you have to prove yourself, and once you do that, you have the opportunity to expand.
I do. One of the things that we've learned, just because you can win a deal doesn't mean you want the deal. And so there's like our sales team constantly are bringing deals, and I'm like, I understand that is an opportunity, and to go and win that deal, just the economics with including the financing stuff just doesn't make sense. So I think, being pragmatic about knowing when it's when to walk away from a deal, no matter what size provider you are, is absolutely key. Because there's probably, I would say, 2, maybe 3 routes each year that we buy, assets that the hyperscalers come to us and say, hey, we have this stranded asset that someone thought, did a half build and got halfway through, and we need someone to go and finish it for us. So just because you can win a deal doesn't mean you want the deal.
Yeah. Okay. We had a couple questions that have come in while we've been answering those questions. Going back to our state legislation discussions, one of the questions is curious if companies are participating at the state level to shape legislation. I mean, one of the states that was brought up is, a bill. Is that something you can comment on?
Oh, absolutely. So I think in particular, as the sort of as the new administration gets their footing under them, and a lot of the sort of funding that was through NTIA and BEAD, refocuses towards physical infrastructure, because we got a reindustrialization in North America that needs to happen. And I think as the government starts to figure out, there's a lot of projects, especially in rural areas, that are in this connectivity doom loop, that a factory's not going to come to a town if there's not bandwidth available, and we can't go build bandwidth if there's no industry available. Government subsidies can get us out of that doom loop, and just some good public policy, especially at the state level. So state level BEAD, middle mile lobbying and sort of recommendations. We are absolutely heavily involved in Texas, in Nevada, and other states. There's too much locked opportunity for all of us, and actually for the sort of rural communities throughout there, for us to sort of have those assets go to waste. So we're a big proponent at the state level, because we think there's a ton of trapped value with just a marginal amount of government money. We can tip a almost business case into a greenlit project. And so you got to engage at the state level to do that. I think all of us who are involved in this business should all be sort of locking arms and sort of telling that same story, because it's good for all of us.
Okay. Back to a little while ago when Kyle and Tom were talking about fiber variances, the other question was, what are the reasons for such a variance in the amount of fiber they are requiring?
Yeah, a
Tom,
little that's use case, right? I mean, I talked about that asynchronous gradient descent, just the use cases they need. If it's anything talking to a person needs single fiber count kind of things, machines talking to machines, the fiber's at it pretty quick.
I think the one way to look at it, and again, I'm not fully understand why these guys need what they think they need, but one way to think about it that we kind of think about it is, let's say a hyperscaler's got a facility on one side of the city and they put a facility on the other side of the facility. They're coming to us and asking for dedicated fiber between those two A and Z locations. And they're using it as essentially think about it as like an in-building cross connect, but on a metro basis. Yeah. And so that's one way to kind of think about, how can they possibly burn an 864, right? It's almost, unfathomable. But that is, I think, kind of one analogy to kind of think about, why they're using this type of capacity as like a true layer one, in-building metro cross connect.
Anything you want to add to that, Kyle?
No, I think he's right on that. That's a great analogy. So Tom hit it right on the head.
All right. So these next two questions I'm going to put in together, and I'll offer a comment before we go into this. The one question was, are we seeing the last fiber boom? And once these routes and high count conduits are in place, are we done? So I happen to be young enough on this group that I remember when the first 96 fiber cable went into Pontiac to Flint, Michigan, and people were just in awe of what the heck are we going to do with 90 megabits of 96 fiber? And of course, here we are, 40 years later, something like that, give or take. And it's that, I think it's the proverbial, we don't know what we don't know. I mean, I sit here and I'm in awe of the things. I mean, AI has become my integrated thought partner in anything I do today. And I'm just amazed at what it can do. And I know that personally, on a scale of 1 to 10, I might be a 2. And I'm thinking I'm using it so I hear what Tom's saying, but as I've watched this industry over the last 40 years, we always there's always more, there's always something more. And I still think in the use of data and whatever, I think the sky's the limit. But you guys, you're the experts. I'm just a sales guy. So go ahead. Who wants to address the are we done?
I just think the quote from Jim Crow, who is the founder of Level 3, and Dan Caruso put in his book, he says, in the short term, reality underperforms the hype. In the long term, our imaginations fail us. And I think that's, we don't know what we don't know, but guys who've been on this call and been in this long enough know that, the trend is our friend. There'll be a down, there'll be a reset, there'll be, but long term, I think the capacity requirements are going to blow our mind.
Yeah, good, Kyle.
I was just gonna say, I completely agree. I don't think we're at some place where it's going to be a bust and it's going to stay permanent. I think it's going to grow, and I think as AI gets more into our lives every day, it's not over. I think it'll ebb and flow, but it's only going up.
And where do we go from there? I mean, and that's even beyond us. I mean, whatever. I think, yeah.
And the one thing I would like to add just quickly, and we haven't kind of set this, but we're referring to this term hyperscalers on this call, which from me over the last, let's say 24 to 36 months, I've really defined as Fangami, which is Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Oracle, Microsoft, and IBM. And so that's kind of our universe. I'd like to hear from my colleagues on the panel. I mean, does all of a sudden that 9-person universe expand, and all of a sudden the hyperscalers are now 100? Because if that does happen, then that's a very bullish sign for everybody, in this industry.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think it could get bigger. I mean, if history's a guide, I think there'll be winners and there'll be losers, and we could see a fair bit of consolidation. And so I think I could see it going either way. And it's so binary. And I think even the prior question about, are we seeing the last fiber boom? I don't know. What I do know is that, like, I don't want to be making those bets on my balance sheet when the people that are going to accrue most of the benefit have the deepest pockets in the world. And so, like, if someone's going to make a bet, then we got to make sure that we're structuring deals that we like out of the gate, and that we're not betting on the come. I think the lesson learned from the first fiber 1.0 was conduits that were put in, the 12 system conduits that were put in are now 25 years later getting used. We can't do that again. We cannot go through another cycle of over provisioning capacity, taking 20 years to fill it up, companies going bankrupt in the cycle. We got to be smarter. So I think while it's variable, like the outcome is variable, I think we're all smarter for it, and we got to be we got to be thoughtful about how we prosecute the boom and let the people that have the deepest pockets take the risks.
What I think I heard, Bill, is unlike 25 years ago, we don't want to overbuild and they will come.
That's right.
But we don't want to hold back either.
That's exactly right. Just finding that balance is going to be.
We got to keep going.
Yeah.
We don't want to overbuild till they come, but we want to keep our foot on the gas.
And I hope Tom, and I think I like. I mean, I'm kind of in Tom's camp of like wanting this. I deeply want this to be a much more diverse buyer community, and I think it has the distinct possibility to become one.
Okay. All right. Well, as we look at our crystal balls and everything else, Bill, where do you see the most opportunity for partnership between providers and builders?
That's a good question. I think the some of the firms that we work with, I think the biggest opportunity is just being really honest on the ability to execute. I think when we're working with partners who help us build some of these networks, we have a very again, the bruises that we've learned, we've made the mistake and gone with the lowest price solution, and you end up paying the price. You get what you pay for. But having a deep partnership with someone with a construction vendor or partner who answers your RFPs honestly and can get through the gauntlet of sort of the sets of questions and has again that proven track record, that's key. So I think it's if these hyperscalers who value proven ability to execute and speed, having an open and honest relationship about what you really can do at what price is essential, because that it's not the lowest price that's always going to win, because it's that speed and trusted ability. So I think more than anything, it's getting that relationship and that transparency really in place.
So, Tom, that's the Zayo perspective. I mean, coming at it from gigabit fiber perspective, how do you see the most opportunity for partnership between providers and builders?
Well, I think the construction guys are critical. You're not going to be able to build this stuff yourself internally. So, we do a little bit of construction, but the vast majority is outsourced. So having a good vendor, on the construction side, I would say even more so than the construction companies, the local fiber engineering outside plant firms are critical. So you got to have partners that will do what you've asked them to do it, and do it in a quality manner.
One pile onto
Good.
that, to Tom's comment, as we bid and we've won a couple of deals with NTIA and BEAD and other places. One of the things that we actually requested to be put in those was, when we win a deal, we want to sponsor scholarships for fiber splicers and outside plant techs. And so, I think, again, as the government looks at good public policy, working between builders and providers to do things where we can actually help them get the employees they need in order to be successful in a thoughtful way. I think there's lots of opportunity there, because these people don't grow on trees.
Kyle, from your guys' perspective, anything you'd like to add there?
Not really. I mean, I think they kind of covered it.
Okay.
No, I don't think I can beat that.
So earlier we talked about the fiber power, discussion, evaluation. Why don't we dig a little deeper into this, Tom? What else would you like to share on how power availability impacts route planning and hyperscaler readiness?
We definitely look at, where the power is potentially available in our community, and that will allow, if we know there's power down there, then we're much more likely to green light a build to that location if we know that is, can happen. But again, I think back to what Bill said. I mean, we're along for the ride on this deal, and we're a rounding error in the whole CapEx, and so those are bigger issues that the campus developer and the customer are going to dictate, and we just need to follow behind them.
One of the studies that we did specific to this question was, is it cheaper to bring the people to the power, or the power to the people? Meaning, is it cheaper for you to build power transmission to bring power from where it's being generated into the major metropolitan areas where the people exist? Or is it cheaper for you to basically put in fiber to have the bandwidth that effectively brings the people to where the power is? And if you look at the cost difference between building power transmission compared to building fiber, depending on the location, there's a 4 to 10x difference in power transmission versus building fiber. So basically, in all cases, it's going to be cheaper to bring the people to the power. So the power is going to be generated where it's generated, and there's going to be fiber brought to it. And that's just kind of law of physics and economics. So we feel strongly that these remote locations where power is available, that's where the power is going to be. And yes, you need to bring. There will be some, obviously you need to interconnect with the power grid, but we feel pretty confident that these locations that are somewhat remote, that's where the data centers will be, and we'll be bringing fiber to it.
So for the slow sales guy, did I hear you say it's 4 to 10 times more costly to transport the power than to transport the fiber?
That's exactly right.
Is that what I heard? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I guess as we had another question that popped in along this route. Of the discussions we've been having, Jim, it says one of the issues in the Q&A there, Jim has one of the issues with the remote/rural sites, i.e. chasing power, which is what we're talking about, takes routes off of legacy rights of way, railroads, or interstate Department of Transportation's, which means longer route time lines. How do you balance those long planning cycles on spec? How do you decide where to push resources on these longer cycles. So I guess in that last conversation, Bill, how do you put this into the equation?
Well, first of all, we try to have the conversations early. So I mentioned there's people that are generating, every guy that has like half a megawatt of power in some location is thinking they should be a Stargate, hyperscale, data center provider. So we see lots of deals, and basically, educating them early that if this is where they have the rights to generate the power, can you cost effectively even get connectivity to it, and cost and time. And so just getting involved early and being able to basically squash projects that weren't viable to begin with is one of the best ways to do it. But yeah, you got to these are complicated builds. You got to get the rights away. You got to get the all the permitting done. That the easiest way is to be involved up front and put the find creative ways to limit the long pole items. But that can only happen when we're involved in the projects up front.
Okay. Kyle, anything you want to add to this?
I think Bill's
recent discussion?
right. Yeah, I think Bill's right. There are a couple of companies out there that are real forward thinking, outside the box type folks that are looking at how do I use some of these creative rights away, and how do I bring power, standalone off-grid power, to those locations to put standalone data centers in places. So I think that's not going to be a mainstream thing, but I think it's going to come into play, and I think we're going to see some of that evolve over the next couple of years, where one company will bring power and fiber to a place that didn't previously have it. I don't think it's going to be mainstream, but I think it'll be a little bit of a market disruptor in places.
Okay. Well, back to you, Bill. What policy? We're switching gears here a little bit. What policies or permitting practices are enabling or slowing down the network readiness?
So basically, all the policies are slowing it down. Right. If there's the single biggest thing that's slowing us down right now, it's permitting. Like there's a certain state that happens to be west of the Mississippi that, like, anytime the team brings a project, I'm like, oh, please, dear. Like we had a cultural, our build was put on hold for like a month and a half for a cultural item that turned out to be a Coke can. So just the permitting and process we have to figure out a way to at the federal level to be able to expedite and speed that up, because it's unworkable now the way that it's slowing everything down. Good news is I think there is attention on this space. So one, just the overall quantity, especially if you're doing something like a long haul build, the quantity of municipalities and permitting entities you have to work with is extremely daunting. The process is, unless you happen to know, like you're doing a bridge crossing and you don't happen to know the exact right guy in the county office to talk to for that bridge crossing, then you're out of luck. So I think the whole paradigm is really slowing the market down. So I'm not going to point to one specific thing, but just overall, the permitting process I think needs legislative help, rather than doing it on onesie twosie it's just going to take too long.
I completely agree. Encompass has got a proposal to try to help on the legislative side that we're working on as well. But I completely agree. These are complicated projects, and the permitting is the biggest issue that we have. It's the long tent pole, railroads, class 3, and commuters, canals, utilities. They're all costly and slow, and they stack up. Now the good news is, Encompass years ago, 25 years ago, established the concept of CLEC. And so I assume a lot of the guys on this call have CLEC. And so if you do have CLEC status in your state and you have access to right of way along, highways or other public utility corridors, that's a massive advantage. And so, we should use that advantage to our advantage. And then, I think the other reason that the permitting thing maybe can be helpful to the little and local guy is just what, Bill said. Hey, you might know the bridge permitting guy because you went across there before or did something else in the community and know that guy. And so maybe that gives you, a little bit of an advantage on the permitting side if you're the local guy versus, some national carrier coming in and talking to some local city manager who doesn't want to take your phone call or process your application.
Kyle, anything you want to add there?
I'm with them. We need policy reform and expedited permitting. It's got to happen. If we want to move this forward as a nation, we need to get moving.
Somebody's got to do a case study on what's happening right now in Phoenix, where there's multiple vendors wanting to do a build, and it's a grinding halt with the municipality saying, hey, y'all need to learn to work together, but not providing a framework to do it. And big important projects are slowing down. So it's just a great case study for permitting gone wrong.
So Bill, you opened our call with the three things you talked about of proven track record, speed, and financial viability. So I think about those as I then say, as we look at the question, what infrastructure and relationship factors make providers more credible to win business?
Other than those three?
I mean, as I asked the question, I wanted to acknowledge that you had already shared those three things before. I mean, how do they relate? Is there something else you'd like to share? I mean, what else would you like to say to that question?
I think the other like we haven't talked at all about, like, we're talking at the infrastructure level. So much of this infrastructure is going to be in place ultimately to enable enterprise and consumer use cases. The big thing people want, like, over time, infrastructure at software speed is going to be critical. As an industry, we've been really bad at putting a software veneer on how you understand, design, build, and operate our infrastructure. So I think that the veneer, the sort of usability veneer is going to be increasingly important. That's the other kind of big item that we haven't talked about at all. But that's more for the enterprise use case than it is for the hyperscalers.
Kyle, what else would you like to add there?
Well, whether you're a hyperscaler or anyone else, you want to work with people who you have a favorable relationship with and trust. And I think, to win that business, you need to have strategic relationships that are strong and real. You need to have a track record of strong past performance. You should be aligned with your customers' goals and helping them solve their problems. You need to be able to manage that relationship both at a technical and a business operational level. That all adds to your credibility. And then really, if you can approach your relationship with that hyperscaler or any other client, with a long-term mindset, almost as a co-builder, I think you're going to be setting yourself up for success in a lot of different ways and setting yourself up for a long-term relationship.
And I guess if we tie back to the very first question, we want to make sure that the co-builders both are culturally aligned in understanding what the problem is and also understanding that the customer is the customer.
Yeah.
Along the way. Anything you want to add to that, Tom?
Business is a contact sport. You got to have sales professionals that create personal relationships with these buying groups. It's critical.
Okay. Well, we're coming up top of the hour. We had one last question from Michael. He wanted to know if we wanted to talk about ILA since power came up. Anybody want to comment anything on that last Q&A one that's in there?
Well, you have to have them. You have to have power for them. So, I think power, as you're figuring out transport planning, whoever it is, their planners, they're going to be looking at where can we put ILAs, and there's more to it than just acquiring real estate. Sometimes you have to factor power in, and they certainly are doing that, and the cost of power is over time is certainly factored in. So I don't think it's anything lost on anybody who's building a long haul network or even a middle mile network, or certainly hyperscalers as they're or somebody's planning on building a network to support a hyperscaler.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, we're coming to the top of the hour. I just want to remind everybody that if you've not yet registered for the show, for the Encompass show, you have time to take advantage of the early discount. We plan to have a hyperscaler with us to talk about this same topic and expand on that topic. Feel free to reach out to myself or to others on what you want to hear and how we want to dig. Again, our Encompass advisory panel is expanding a technical track in our show to let other people know, and however else we can help make the show better for you, please let me know. And I want to thank Bill, Tom, and Kyle for participating today, and everybody have a great day.